Last month, the European Union levied one more round of sanctions on ships and ship-owning entities that are helping keep Russia's oil revenues flowing. How can ships, as part of a shadow fleet, do this secretly at a time when countries are using satellite imagery to show where their missiles struck? Why is it so difficult to prevent transfer of oil from one ship to another on the high seas? Hello and welcome back to Business Matters of the Hindu with me, K. Bharat Kumar. Europe has mostly rallied around Ukraine ever since Russia invaded the latter. Since the time that the West brought on sanctions on shadow fleets of ships and brought in an oil price cap, Russian revenues on this count have dipped. But revenues have not gone away. They were in March 2025 about 14% lower when compared to March 2023 and 21% lower compared to March 2022. According to a statement that the European Council of Nations had put out. On May 20th, the Council adopted its largest ever package targeting ships that are allegedly part of a shadow fleet. 189 vessels originating from third countries were targeted, bringing the total designated vessel count to 342. These vessels, according to nations in the West, are responsible for transporting Russian oil while engaging in high-risk and irregular shipping practices. The sanctions on the shadow fleet ecosystem, including specific fleet and owners, are aimed at stopping the dangerous practices at sea while transporting Russian oil. This list includes entities from the United Arab Emirates, Turkey, and Hong Kong. The list also includes one important insurer of the Russian oil shipping industry. But it is not easy to stop this flow of oil from Russia and of revenues accruing to Russia. For as Elizabeth Braw, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, writes, the main characteristic of this shadow fleet remains in place, and that is the fact that it can be constantly replenished. She says it can be replenished because there are ship owners willing to sell their retirement age ships into the shadow fleet. In fact, doing so is commercially advantageous for them. Retiring old vessels involves paying for them to be scrapped, while selling them into the shadow fleet brings in money. A lot of it. What does Russia have to say about all these sanctions? In general, Russia has maintained that all such sanctions by the West were illegal. When further sanctions were announced on oil tankers by the US in January this year, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said, "It is clear that the United States will continue to try to undermine the positions of our companies in non-competitive ways, but we expect that we will be able to counteract this." He added that Russia would carefully monitor the consequences and configure the work of our companies in order to minimize the consequences of these illegal decisions. And last month, when Estonia sighted a ship, an oil tanker, moving suspiciously in its waters without a flag indicating country of registration and potentially without insurance, it accosted the ship. At that time, it spotted a Russian military jet circling the skies right above the ship, indicating support for the tanker. Then Estonian Navy escorted the oil tanker into Russian waters before the jet disappeared. Estonian Foreign Minister said that the jet had violated NATO airspace for more than 1 minute and that the situation was serious, according to him, because Russia had shown its willingness to use military power to protect its fleet. Now, what is this shadow fleet? A Reuters article states that there are hundreds of aging oil tankers that are part of this fleet, helping transport Russian oil. They often have opaque ownership structures and sail without what the West calls top-tier Western insurance or safety certification cover. They often have unknown insurers or assessors of vessel seaworthiness, both required for ocean-going commercial ships. Many of these tankers sail across the Baltic Sea and move oil through the Gulf of Finland, a critical route for Russia's energy exports. A Brookings Institution exercise tracked ships moving out of Russian ports. It defined a ship in the shadow fleet as having no clear beneficial owner. It noted that in the years before the war, these ships accounted for a mere 6% of the total number of ships moving out of Russian ports, but in recent times that had risen to 35%. Interestingly, it also found that after a recent round of sanctions by the US on about 75 ships, 60% of them were sold by Western owners to shadow fleet operators. What do ships in the shadow fleet do? A note put out by the European Parliamentary Research Service says that to evade sanctions, The Russian shadow fleet makes use of flags of convenience and intricate ownership and management structures, while employing tactics to conceal the origins of its cargo, such as ship-to-ship transfers, automatic identification system blackouts, falsified positions, transmission of false data, and other deceptive or even illegal techniques. The research service also points out that not only do these shadow fleets help Russia rake in the moolah, that is oil revenues, but they also operate with aging and poorly maintained vehicles that do not often comply with regulations. It points out that they also pose a risk to the environment, to maritime safety, as well as security. Interestingly, it is possible for a ship to originate from a certain country but register itself elsewhere. And that is why we have countries like Liberia, Panama, and the Marshall Islands, all countries with open registrations. These countries dominate global flag registrations. The US, for instance, is the fourth largest ship-owning nation but comes 19th with respect to flag registrations. Where does India stand with respect to oil imports from Russia? India's imports dipped a bit, especially at the beginning of this year because of further Western sanctions on oil tankers, but that has now recovered, and India's imports of Russian oil are set to reach a 10-month high this month at 1.8 million barrels a day. Interestingly, the European Union still continues to import oil from Russia, and this is the third year of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and in this period, the value of the EU's imports from Russia of oil has surpassed the quantum of financial aid that the region has sent to Ukraine in 2024. This is according to a note put out by the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air. The non-profit pointed out that Russia's stronghold over new markets also solidified in the third year of the invasion. The three biggest buyers of Russian fossil fuels, that is China at euros 78 billion, India at euro 49 billion, and Turkey at euros 34 billion, were responsible for 74% of Russia's total revenues from fossil fuels in the third year of the invasion. That brings us to the Did You Know section of our episode. Did you know that soon after the sanctions came in, many Russian ships struck alliances with Indian firms? Many ships switched their base to Dubai, where Indians have a presence in shipping, according to an article in our paper, The Hindu. The Indian Register of Shipping, the IRS, a classification society, saw an increase in the ships it was certifying, giving rise to charges of Indian involvement in shadow fleets. The IRS said its primary responsibility was to the safety of a vessel and that would not be compromised. It said that it had been asked to provide safety-related classification services to a number of vessels by Dubai-based entities. These vessels were registered under the flag administrations of Liberia and Cyprus, and none flew the Russian flag, the IRS said. And here's a quiz question for this week. How many ships are currently supposed to be part of the shadow fleet that helps transport Russian oil? And here's the answer to last week's question, which was, what is India's per capita income measured by purchasing power parity, and how does it compare with China and Japan? India's per capita income stands at $12,131, but lags China, which is at about close to $29,000, and Japan, which is at about $54,700. That's all we have for you folks in this episode. If you enjoyed what you saw, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. Until we meet again, have a lovely time ahead.